Family, I really need you to lean in and listen closely for the next few minutes. We are about to unpack something that I promise you could totally change how you see your faith, your prayers, pretty much everything. Okay, you ready? Let's dive in.
Just think about this for a second. Gravity. It doesn't care if you're a good person. It doesn't care about your sincerity or your good intentions. It's just a law. It's impartial. It's consistent. It's an unmovable force. And look, you can pray with every ounce of faith you have, but if you step off a 10-story building, that prayer isn't going to suspend the law of gravity for you. It's just a fixed, fundamental law of how our physical universe works. And here is the absolute game changer, the truth that so many of us we were never taught. The spiritual realm, God's kingdom, it operates with that same integrity. It's built on laws, not just our feelings or our desperate pleas. This misunderstanding leads to a huge, huge problem in the lives of so many believers. We end up treating God's kingdom like it's supposed to bend to our emotions, our intentions, or all our excuses. But that's just not how it was designed. We find ourselves in these tough situations, right? We're facing all these negative results. And so we pray, and we pray hard for God to just take them away. But what if those situations aren't random? What if they are simply the direct consequences of breaking a spiritual law? Just like falling is the consequence of defying gravity. So let's really build this out. God is a God of systems and order. He's established these incredible systems that govern absolutely everything, from how planets orbit the sun to the outcomes we see in our own lives. And what's so powerful here is the language God himself uses through the prophet Jeremiah. He literally points to his unbreakable contract with creation, and he specifically calls out the fixed laws of heaven and earth. Let that just sink in for a second. Fixed laws. These are not divine suggestions. They're not just friendly tips from heaven. They are fixed. They don't change. So the point is, spiritual results aren't just something we negotiate through prayer. They're governed by principles. And this totally reframes how we think about obedience, doesn't it? It's not just about trying to be a good person so God won't be mad at you. Real biblical obedience, it's about intelligently lining yourself up with the very fabric of reality that God designed. It's learning to work with the system, not constantly fighting against it. Okay, this is where it gets really cool. Let's use an analogy here. Because if we can grasp how natural laws work together, we get this brilliant picture of how spiritual laws, including grace, actually function. We tend to think of gravity as something that just holds us down, but it was designed for our good. It's the law that makes life on this planet even possible. It lets you swallow your food, it keeps your blood circulating the right way. It's a gift, but, and this is the key, if you disrespect that law, the consequence is automatic, it's impersonal. Now apply that exact same thinking to the Garden of Eden. When God said, "The day you eat of it, you will die," that wasn't just a threat coming from an angry father, it was a statement of law. Adam's choice triggered a spiritual law, the law of sin and death, just like stepping off a building triggers the law of gravity. The consequence was already built into the system. So here it is, side by side. The law of sin and death works like spiritual gravity. It's this constant downward pull. And when that law is violated, the consequence, death, separation, chaos, it's automatic. The system itself enforces it. It doesn't have to wait for God to get upset. So, how do we escape this spiritual gravity? Well, you don't pretend it doesn't exist. You engage a higher law. Think about a giant airplane. It doesn't defy gravity. It engages the laws of aerodynamics and thrust to introduce a more powerful law, the law of lift, that overcomes gravity. And that, right there, is a beautiful picture of grace. The Apostle Paul frames it perfectly. And notice his words. He uses the word law on both sides of the equation. See, grace isn't the absence of law. It is a higher spiritual law. The law of the spirit of life is the spiritual version of aerodynamic lift. It doesn't cancel the law of sin and death. It just completely overpowers it. So if you're tracking with me, you're probably realizing this changes everything about our prayer life. It moves us away from begging God for exceptions and toward asking him for wisdom. It shifts the entire dynamic. Let's be honest, so many of our prayers sound like this. God, please just suspend the law for me. Let me keep living in bitterness and gossip, but please just give me peace. And heaven's response isn't really no, it's more like change your alignment. The more powerful prayer is, God, show me the principles of peace. Teach me how to cooperate with your law of life. And this is why it is so, so important. This is why it's life and death. God says his people are destroyed not because they lack passion or sincerity or even faith, but because they lack knowledge. They lack an understanding of how his world, both the one we see and the one we don't, actually works. So this brings us all to a crossroads, a decision point. We can keep living in frustration, fighting against the way reality is structured, or we can finally decide to learn the principles of the kingdom and start living by them. And when you get down to it, disobedience isn't just a personal offense against God's feelings. At its very core, it's a rebellion against reality itself. It's like arguing with the spiritual physics of the universe. And that's a fight you will never, ever win.
But on the flip side, when you choose alignment, when you learn to cooperate with God's systems, man, everything starts to change. The results are incredible. Peace stops being this thing you're always striving for. It just becomes your normal state. Confusion starts to lift and clarity returns. Fear loses its grip on you, and that connection to heaven becomes consistent and strong.
So I'm going to leave you with this question, and I really want you to think about it. Take a look at your prayer life, at those areas where you feel stuck and frustrated. Are you just asking God to break the rules for you, to make an exception? Or are you finally humble enough to ask him, teach me your ways, show me your laws, so I can align my whole life with them? Because once you get this, once you understand how these laws really work, you don't have to live your life in a constant spiritual freefall anymore. You can learn to engage that higher law, the law of the spirit of life. It's time to stop falling, and it's time to start rising.